I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Margaret Cederoth. She is an urban planner with nearly 2 decades of experience working in the areas of transportation and sustainability planning, land use, and international planning. Ms. Cederoth's experience includes sustainability strategies for transportation infrastructure projects in the Middle East and North America, New Start's transit planning and funding submittals, master planning infrastructure programs, and evaluation of infrastructure projects against sustainability metrics, including Envision and GRESB. Ms. Cederoth leads corporate sustainability for WSP Parsons Brinkerhoff in the U.S., as well as managing the sustainability program for California High-Speed Rail. And I'm excited to introduce Ms. Margaret Cederoth.
So, good morning. I am incredibly pleased to be here this morning, and I appreciate the invitation to get to come speak to a group of people who, when we sit in Sacramento and we're, working, we're sitting at our desks, nose to the grindstone, trying to get this project done, from time to time I think, oh, wouldn't it be great if I could just talk to a room full of contractors and construction experts to really dive into how we can explore innovating and pushing the envelope when it comes to sustainability and low carbon construction, and here we are. So this is really quite a treat for me to be here this morning and get to talk with you all and have a good conversation. So as Brian mentioned, I am the sustainability manager at California High-Speed Rail. So I manage a very comprehensive program of sustainability that looks at sustainable design and how we can do district scale infrastructure around our stations, as well as other aspects, including our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And the key reason we're here today is what we're doing to really innovate around the idea of sustainable infrastructure, and particularly how we deliver California high-speed rail. So I do want to touch a little bit on the system and what it is, because not everyone spends their day living and breathing high-speed rail. So you need to kind of enter into the framework of what's the best journey you ever took. And what we're trying to get to, what the state of California voted for when it approved our bond funds back in 2008, was really transforming how people travel throughout the state, right? We want a system that's easy to get to. You want to be able to find the front door. You don't want to be confused when you're on it. You need to know where to go. And we really want it to be a journey that gets you from your key destinations in a way that's incredibly pleasant and allows you to work and play along the way. This is a good overview of the system. A show of hands, people who have been to California. Okay, right. I won't go into that much detail, but as you can see, I'm sure many of you drove in California. Okay, and took planes, of course. So how many people have taken a train in California? Okay, well, we know what that journey is like. So there is definitely room for improvement, and critically, high-speed rail provides really fills a gap in that kind of transportation realm, right? We need our air network, we need our road network, but missing is a way of getting from point A to point B in that 100 to 600 mile range that's really high quality, high speed, and high capacity. So by 2025, we'll have our first operating segment in motion, and by 2029, we will have built out the system between San Francisco and Los Angeles and Anaheim. That will be a trip that should take under 3 hours. You'll be moving at speeds up to 220 miles an hour. Our system's designed for 250. And you'll be really connecting places within the state that haven't been before. So picture that road journey you took in California. It probably took you 8 hours to get from San Francisco to Los Angeles. We're essentially shrinking the state by implementing high-speed rail. And we're also providing some key, very vital economic connections. 10 million people are moving to California by 2050. So how are they going to travel? Where are they going to go? When you look at the different economic generators within the state of California, there's also a little bit of a disconnect between what happens in the Central Valley and those key economic drivers in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, and the LA Basin. So the high-speed rail system was deliberately positioned. The stations I showed you earlier were selected with the intent of connecting these places in a way they never have been before. Rail is also a great way to get a lot out of space, right? There's no better way to move 1,000 people from point A to point B than on a high-speed rail or other rail vehicle, right? It's very space efficient compared to the same capacity you might get at an airport, and it's sort of, there's really no comparison when it comes to highway miles, right? You need a lot of lane miles to move the same amount of people. It's also uniquely, and we know this from transit and other investments in rail experience around the globe, and as you said, it's about time, we got it in America, that rail investments are a great way of catalyzing infill development. So there's 10 million people who are moving to the state of California. We'd like to move them to existing urban cores, right? California enjoys a rich environmental heritage, right? It has some of the most beautiful places on the planet, I would argue. And protecting those is quite important. And protecting the natural and working lands we have also plays a role in our continuing sustainability and sustainable development. This is why we're here, right? It surprises us, it surprises all of us who travel and talk about the project, how often people do not know that the project is in construction. We have already over $3 billion that we've invested in construction packages throughout the Central Valley. That's 119 miles of high-speed rail infrastructure in construction now. We have a lot of great videos on the website that I'll give you a link to later, but it's important to keep this in mind, right? We've been underway for quite some time, and it always surprises us that people, I mean, if you only read the newspaper, you'd think we were dead and we weren't doing anything, but in fact, the system is under construction. What I want to focus on today is that we are endeavoring to set a new model for infrastructure delivery. And we do this because we're coming out of a pretty strong ethic and a pretty solid foundation of policy, regulation, and legislation in the state of California, but also because it is intended, the citizens of California intended it to be a transformational, sustainable piece of infrastructure. So we've already required things from our construction packages that are somewhat unique, actually, for infrastructure projects. We require 100% of the steel and concrete to be recycled. We've required that the contractor source Tier 4 engines for the fleets. We've required a very clean on-road fleet, a certain average year for the fleet. And then elsewhere on the project, we have looked at ways of mitigating what our impact is, and I'll delve into that a little bit more. And of course, the headline here that sort of explains this graphic is that we'll be operating on 100% renewable energy, right? Every trip you take on high-speed rail is going to be reducing carbon emissions in the state of California. And that is why we're a part of delivering on California's very ambitious climate targets. By 2030, we should see a cumulative reduction of at least 2.5 million metric tons, possibly more. And that is a key component of delivering on the target that was set last year by SB 32. I'm not sure how many of you pay attention to California regulation, but it's very innovative and it's quite leading edge when it comes to climate legislation in the United States. So we have a reduction of 40% of 1990 levels by 2030. And moving the transportation sector toward electric rail and transit and electrification in general is a critical part of that. So as I mentioned, the policy context is quite unique, and it provides an incredibly good stage for us to really push the needle when it comes to, or rather move the needle when it comes to achieving better outcomes in our construction package. We've taken a comprehensive look at sustainability. We have these 5 key areas that help focus our efforts. Right? People who work in the sustainability realm come up with these frameworks, right? It helps organize activity towards common goals and common ends. And in particular, you can see we've paid a lot of attention to sustainable infrastructure because it helps us achieve some pretty key objectives for the state. And I'm going to dive into those in a little bit more detail. So a quick headline, let's see if I can get my pointer to work. This is our overall, our kind of big overview of our carbon inventory. And right here, I'm sure the folks of you, I know we've got a lot of incredibly smart people in the room, but if we're delivering carbon reductions in operation, right, about 58 to 72 million metric tons in our first 50 years, then we look across the whole life of the infrastructure and say, where is it we need to focus our efforts to get a better outcome when it comes to carbon? And that, of course, is right there in construction. We have a target of about 520,000 metric tons of emissions that we anticipate coming out of the construction site. And it's part of my job and my team's job to work to drive that number down and to innovate ways to make that a little bit better. So this is where I'd like to spend the most of our time today. And I know Magnus is going to sort of nod at me when I need to get going a little bit quicker. But this is giving you an overview of our construction. So fundamental principle, right? We'd like to drive down emissions first, right? The problem is now, right? We don't want to press the on button to irrevocable climate change. So the more we can do to reduce that boundary now, the better. So we've looked at, we're all familiar with construction sites. You know, there's only a couple areas where you're going to get some good traction, right? You have to have equipment building what you're building. And that equipment has to run as long as it needs to run to get the thing built, right? So I can't tell the contractor that they only get, 10 hours of cranes, right? That isn't where we motivate people. Where we're seeing a lot of opportunity, of course, is around the fuels and the fuel source, around the vehicles and the efficiency of those vehicles. And then, of course, looking at ways, including recycling on site, that can also reduce emissions. I highlighted black carbon here because Tier 4 equipment is incredibly good from an air quality standpoint, right? It achieves a much cleaner construction site because you're reducing oxides of nitrogen and other air pollution. Happily, in a strange way, because you're reducing PM 2.5, you're also reducing black carbon, which is a short-lived climate pollutant. And that's one of those areas where the more we can do around the vehicles to make them cleaner and more efficient, the more we can do to make the construction site more efficient. So the authority is committed to carbon neutrality in construction, which is a fairly substantial undertaking. And first, of course, we're reducing that boundary, and then after that, we'll look at offset mechanisms. We already have an agreement with a California agency to do an extensive amount of tree planting throughout the state of California. So we'll be doing a lot of urban tree planting, urban greening, as well as replanting some of the burnt lands that are wildfires, which are increasingly common in the state of California. So we are looking at everything. Every opportunity we have to reduce emissions on site and to achieve more sustainable outcomes. It's interesting, the life of sustainability managers, right? You spend some time talking about renewable energy, solar energy, you spend time over here talking about district scale infrastructure opportunities, and I spend a lot of time talking about life cycle emissions, and then I've actually spent a lot of time talking to people about cow poo, because it's, we have a substantial amount of that in our dairies in California. We have a great dairy industry, but it's also an issue that has to be dealt with. So if you can turn that into a fuel, right, if you can minimize that methane, I think that's a win-win, although this is a space that requires a lot more thought and attention. But as a very large infrastructure project, we recognize that we have the capacity to really start making a difference in changing what's happening. I think I neglected to mention earlier, but the entire construction package will last, the entire construction build lasts through about 2029, and the cost of that is estimated currently at about $64 billion. So when we look at that, we recognize we also have the responsibility to start making a difference. So we've already taken steps in our construction documents, in our contracts, in order to try to move behaviors into this lower carbon realm. We're driven, of course, by the California regulatory structure, by Executive Order B 3015, which advises us to look at life cycle impacts and make decisions based upon new climate data. But the implementation of that has really come down to the leadership that we have on our board and through our CEO. And so implementation is where we really find we've we're looking for continuous improvement, right? We've already set contract provisions and specifications to implement a number of these objectives, as I mentioned, but we're also looking to where we can go next. One area where we're looking at, of course, is the materials that are selected on site, but as I noted, on our construction site, we're getting a lot of data. I'm learning a lot about what happens on that site. If we could streamline the way that data gets collected, that would be ideal. And it's not data for its own sake. It is data that we use to make policies, and it's data that's important for us to report up to folks who are providing us funding and a number of key stakeholders. High-speed rail is the recipient of cap and trade funds from the state of California. We have a 25% appropriation. That's an incredibly vital source of funding for the program. Tied to that, of course, is this duty of care and this responsibility for clear reporting around carbon metrics. So metrics are key. And we've already required the contractor to do an extensive amount of reporting from the construction site. So every month we get a record of all the equipment that's been operating on site, how many hours, the horsepower, the make, the model. We get a lot of information out, and it's very important to us for establishing what our air quality and GHG emissions are, and then understanding, from my perspective, where we can set requirements and policy to start driving that down. So I know we have a lot of on-road vehicles, light-duty vehicles, because it's a very long, linear construction site. So I know that in the coming years, as we do more procurements, we're going to be looking towards improving requirements for the contractor's fleet. We'll also be looking at ways of requiring and ways of incentivizing the use of heavy-duty electric vehicles and off-road equipment as well. So to wrap up, these policy objectives, these requirements, the way we're trying to move the needle on this project are already seeing some pretty profound and very valuable, important outcomes for Californians, right? We've invested over $2.3 billion in the state of California, which is having a tremendous economic return. And that's a very tangible outcome for folks who have been underemployed or unemployed in the Central Valley, right? We've had about 13,000, right, job hours just in in fiscal year 15-16. That's translated to about 1,300 job years for folks who are in disadvantaged communities, as defined by the state of California. And we also have a very ambitious and very progressive small business goal. And I know that's an area of opportunity really to liaise among some of the larger contractors and smaller contractors to really change, to sort of drive down this kind of ethic of sustainability and make it a part of everybody's business practice. We've got 334 small businesses at work already on the program, including 68 in these disadvantaged communities, and small businesses, of course, are a jobs engine. So we have a requirement for recycling that's being carried out by a small business in the city of Fresno that's been able to buy new equipment and add jobs. And so we're finding that we've got that really good synergy between policy from a community, economic, and environmental standpoint. I invite you to take a look at our website. We've got some fantastic construction videos. We've got a lot of great data there. We published our first sustainability report as well this year. You can go to buildhsr.com. It's a great resource. I think you'll find it quite interesting. And I'm more than happy to be in touch with folks who have great ideas and innovation on the construction side. So thanks so much for your time this morning.